As I said at the start of the show, we have a guest joining us. We have her on the phone, Nonie Darwish. She has joined us in the past. She is, first of all, a great friend. But second, in introducing her, I want to just mention just a little bit about her background before we get to bring her on. First of all, she was not born in America. She was born in Egypt. She lived a portion of her childhood in Egypt, a portion of her childhood living in Gaza. She came to America in 1978, came with her husband in 1978, and she is therefore an amazing amazing observer of what drew her to America, what the changes she sees in America over the decades since she's been here. She's watching the destruction of the peace in our cities, watching the violence and destruction in our cities, and she came to America in part because she wanted to have a freer life than the life she had in Egypt. She grew up under Islam. She converted to Christianity, and now she's here in America. She's the author of numerous books. She's just a national treasure, but author of numerous books. One's called Now They Call Me Infidel, Why I Renounce Jihad for America. I got to tell you, that was a very moving book. I can't urge you strong enough to read it. Now They Call Me Infidel, one book. Cruel and Unusual Punishment, The Terrifying Global Implications of Islamic Law. She wrote The Devil We Don't Know, The Dark Side of Revolutions in the Middle East. And finally, Holy, as in W-H-O-L-L-Y, Wholly Different, Why I Chose Biblical Values Over Islamic Values. She has been active in the movement to awaken America to understand the threat of Islamic jihad in America, the threat of cultural jihad, civilization jihad. She's got some great observations about where we are today in America. So, without further ado, I believe we have Nonie Darwish on the phone. There she is. There's your picture.
Hi, Debbie. Hi, Debbie.
Hi, Nonie. Great to hear your voice. Great to have you. So,
my pleasure to be with you today.
So glad you could join us. So, I'm going to just start with, Nonie, you have been very active trying to write about and to awaken America to the potential threat of Islamic jihad in this country, not necessarily in a violent military form, but in civilizational, cultural jihad, the various turning of America away from the ideas that are founding the Christian values of our country. And so now we're in the middle of 2020, literally pretty much the middle of 2020, July 1st, and we're watching horrible violence in the American streets, and we're seeing some kind of similar demands from the protesters we're watching around this country and the demands of Islamic jihad in terms of bringing more totalitarian mindset, bringing a more destructive of America mindset. So let me just start with, if you would, tell us your overall impressions of what is driving these movements we're watching in this country, the destruction in the cities, Antifa. Do you see connections between that and the Islamic mindset?
Absolutely. Marxism has united with Islamism now. So we are seeing a Marxist movement in America that is very much influenced by Islamic tactics. And like you said, I agree with you that every society, even America at its roots, had its people who hated it. So every society has the seeds for its own destruction. And America now is a shining example to the world of those seeds have grown and have taken over the garden we have lived in called America. The seeds of destruction is now in control. And there are many, many reasons for that, Debbie. It's very sad that I'm seeing the signs so clear to me, because I did live under tyranny, so I'm especially very sensitive to this, what's happening today, and I'm very surprised that many Americans are just looking the other way, ignoring what's happening. Some Americans are apologizing to the Black Lives Matter, kissing their feet, which is a very sad sign. It reminds me of how many, when I lived in the Middle East, how many ordinary people just kissed the feet of the Muslim Brotherhood just to keep them keep them safe to live. The tyranny was so hard that truly some people supported the Muslim Brotherhood just so they can leave them alone. So this is happening in America, but under a different name. Tyranny comes under many different names, and today it's called it's called Black Lives Matter, and it's also the group the
Antifa.
other group,
Antifa?
Antifa, exactly. But really, Black Lives Matter is just a pretty name to bring together Antifa with the disgruntled, oppressed, maybe unhappy black youth in America. Instead of giving them a way to how to prosper, how to improve their lives, they are telling them, let's go have a revolution and against America. So they're bringing together, and there's a lot of white youth in these groups who are just as rebellious as the young black group. So it's not. I'm looking at the faces, and it's not a strictly black group at all.
Go right ahead. Go ahead.
It's very sad to see that the most sad part for me is I see the ordinary American looking at this and just walking the other way and looking the other way, like this is it's going to be okay. They don't see that their way of life will never be the same again, and I see that. I see that this mayor of Seattle is just the product of generations of hating patriarchy and the family unit. This feminist movement, threw away the father from the family, like throwing the baby with the bathwater. They threw the father with the bathwater, and the end result is a family unit headed by a woman who cannot control these young youth alone by herself. And I understand that. It's a very tricky, they think, they idealize these single women almost like they are, they can never be wrong. And they have burdened these women. They've told them, you don't need a man. Here's $500 from the government a month. You don't need a man. And they have failed these women. They have really hurt them. And now they have all these kids, and not only boys and girls. You've seen what the girls are doing on the streets, just like boys. They're jumping. Those girls are jumping on the hoods of the police cars. And they are going into fights with men, physical fights.
Yep.
That I have never seen that in the worst days of a riot in the Middle East. I have never seen this stomping on police cars anywhere in the world with our politicians telling the police, if you touch them, you're at fault. This is the result of replacing the father in the home with a mother who cannot do her job alone.
Nonie, I got to jump in. You touched on so many points. I want to, before we get off, I'm so grateful you were available today. One thing you mentioned, I want to be sure to really hone in on or focus on a moment. When you've talked about in America, you've tried to raise the alarm bell about Islam and Islamic jihad and cultural jihad. And people who try to talk about those things are accused of being Islamophobic. So people back down. So I don't want to be labeled Islamophobic. So I'm just going to pretend that the Islamization of America isn't happening, or somehow we'll get past it. It's the same thing watching the violence and tyranny at the hands of the rioters and the Black Lives Matter movement, Antifa. People say, well, I don't want to be called racist, so I'm just going to pretend somehow if all of this, because it's the same tactic the Islamists use as the very aggressive Antifa people use. You're labeled a racist if you criticize, you're labeled Islamophobe. It's an astonishing silencing of the spirit of the American people and the right of the American people to speak up. That was a great, great point you made. And I'd love to have you address that again, just the idea that we're being silenced because we're afraid of being called names.
Absolutely, and you know that it's very similar to the Middle East. In the Middle East, to silence people, they call them infidels. So you're an infidel, and if you speak openly, or you say the truth, or you object to something, then you're an infidel. So everybody in the Middle East cannot speak the truth because they're scared of being called an enemy of Allah, or you're an infidel. So the same thing is happening in America, but the word is not infidel, it's racist. And it doesn't really matter what the boogie word is. And that's why I hate this word racist in America, because this word is going to be responsible for the destruction of our freedom of speech. And it has succeeded. Nobody wants to be called a racist. And when I was, when I spoke on college campuses, there was a couple of very leftist white students who go, "Oh, but that's racist, what you're saying." So I told them, you don't ever scare me by saying you're racist. You think I'm going to be scared like Americans? I was born in a culture where slavery was a human right. And you are telling me you think I'm going to be scared of being called a racist? You have all you don't have the order of your priorities straightened up. You don't even know where the problems in the world are. And I really felt bad for these kids. They were defending the Muslim Brotherhood, which was oppressing everybody, including women. And speaking against them in America, I'm being called a racist. So I told them, I don't care about that word, and you can call me whatever you want. And I believe that you're the one who's a racist if you're so focused on race like that.
Nonie, that is such a good point, and I'm glad, I want to segue to talk a little bit about the Muslim Brotherhood. I love your observations about this whole phenomenon we're watching in our country, where it's not just that we have to tolerate the violence and we can't arrest people, we can't stop it, we barely can find the bravery to shut down truly violent protests, but you can't even criticize it. And many people, including Republican politicians who ought to be the ones speaking up and saying this has to end, they are silenced by the fear that you were not silenced by. You kept talking, but many Republican politicians, it's too scary. I don't want to be the one called racist. I'm going to let this go and somehow hopefully it'll pass. But I want to turn and ask you something about the Muslim Brotherhood. There is a document, you and I were talking earlier on the phone today, a document that was uncovered, which was the Muslim Brotherhood's plan for Islam to take over America. The explanatory memorandum discovered in 1991, written by the Muslim Brotherhood, that essentially was their very lengthy game plan, how radical Islam is going to take over America. And it was we're not going to be able to do it militarily, but we're going to do it through the shift in the culture, silencing people who criticize, just kind of shifting America's expectations and understandings of America's goodness. So that was discovered in 1991. I know you've been active talking about Islamization in America. How are we doing? Is the Muslim Brotherhood making progress on their civilization jihad plan?
Actually, their prediction in that memorandum is coming true in a way. They said in their memorandum that we will destroy them, America, by their own hands. And recently, the Ayatollah in Iran said we were saying this, death to America, but now it's Americans walking in the streets, rioting in the streets of America, saying the same thing, death to America. So really, we have to pay attention. What are we doing to our country? And Debbie, I think there is a reason why the Muslim Brotherhood philosophy is winning. It's winning, and we're allowing it. And it's not just the Muslim Brotherhood philosophy, but leftists. The leftists and Islamists are very much in common in many ways. And that's why I wrote an article a couple of years ago saying how Saul Alinsky and Islamism and Sharia are very similar. This is. I have a hunch why the left in America doesn't want to admit we have an inner city problem with the youth. They don't want to admit that. They would rather blame the police than admit that the inner city youth, regardless whether they're white, black, Hispanic, whatever, it doesn't matter. They don't want to admit that we have a problem with the upbringing of our young people. The reason is they have, for 50 years, taken the men out of the home and heavily criticized the patriarchal family, and which led to the failure of the family, and the very obvious failure of the family in America is the gangs, the inner city youth. That is it's so obvious why the matriarchal one parent household, which is usually a woman, has failed. And I believe they would rather blame the police and oppress the police rather than say we have a problem with our youth.
I believe that's true.
And I'm writing an article right now about this topic.
Oh, good. Okay. Nonie, it's interesting what you're talking about. Yesterday in the show, I had Star Parker, who's the founder of Cure, and she works in a different arena, but she's working in different ways to try to bring out, to help the American family come back together again, to try to send the message to low-income communities, especially in her work with Cure in black inner city communities, about the idea that kids need two parents, that the challenges American youth, black Americans face are in large part due to the failure of the family, the destruction of the family, the loss of family structure. And so she's making the same point you are, coming from a different perspective. And I got to tell you, to your point, Nonie, about the left liking this, the reason the left is really good with, fine with, is just not going to argue about the destruction of the family, because it enables the leftist big government control, tyranny, takeover happen. Because the family structure has fallen apart, you have so much chaos, it enables, in fact, people end up crying out to have big government take over. So the family destruction enables the growth of leftist American tyranny. What do you think about that?
Exactly. And not only that, the leftists benefit by this army of unhappy young people. It's their army to set against us, middle class and working class in America, to make us afraid and to listen to them. Every time they are not happy with us, or we open our mouths, we infidels racist infidels, open our mouths against the government to give us maybe less taxes, this or that, they set their little army to riot in the streets so they can shut us up. That's exactly like the Muslim Brotherhood, and I see a lot of parallels here.
Nonie Darwish, I knew you'd have an amazing and really a unique perspective in watching all the violence and watching in the streets in our cities, and everyone's trying to figure out how to solve it and what do we have to do to. And your perspective is just just so helpful and so I don't know what word to say, deep. I mean, really aware of the.
Actually, because I lived it, Debbie. I lived it, but under another name, under another purpose, perhaps. But the dynamic is very similar. Every time the ordinary Middle Eastern person comes to the government and say there is too much oppression, this or that, they release these horrible people on the streets to make us just silence and be happy with what we have.
So well said.
They release the mob on you.
They release the yes.
I think this is happening in America today. You guys, you middle class Americans want to elect Trump. How dare you? And now we release our little mob and scare the hell out of you, so you can be happy and vote for us.
You're saying this is how the left thinks. Be really clear, because you're a Trump supporter. You're saying what the left is releasing the mob to say, how dare you support Trump, because they want you to not support him next time, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's scaring us, humbling us, rubbing our nose on the ground to scare us into submission. This is all against us who dare vote for the person we want, or dare ask for less taxes, or dare say the family, God and country and the family is important.
Nonie Darwish, you have amazing perspectives. I want to remind our listeners again, first of all, I will tell you, Nonie, I learn more from you, even though I read a lot. I learn more from you in your books, the two especially I want to mention again, the original, the one that I really got me so interested in getting to talk with you. Now They Call Me Infidel, which I think was back from 2004. I'm not sure when it was written. 2004? And then
2004, and it came out 2006, and then 2009, 2011, and 2017, my 4 books.
But the other one I want to commend to our listeners is your most recent one called Wholly Different: Why I Chose Biblical Values Over Islamic Values. I think there are not enough Americans who even recognize extreme difference between the God of the Christian, by the Judeo-Christian scriptures, that what God is like, what people think God is and what therefore man is, versus what people think about God if you have the Islamic teaching from the Quran. Your book laid out so many differences and explains things I think unless you grew up in Islam, you would never even begin to perceive. You wouldn't recognize how differently what the two books say about the nature of God, the nature of man, the nature of your rights, comparing the Bible and the Quran. And your book was brilliantly laying it out. It explains so much about how very different the civilizations were created by Christianity and Islam. Love that book. I really want to commend that one. So, Nonie, if people want to read more about you, I know I mentioned your books. I know is there a website they can go to learn more about you, or are your books the way to learn more about you?
They can find me on Facebook. I have a lot of followers on Facebook, and I make a lot of postings there.
Yes, you do. I love it.
Very quick. Yeah, and I write articles here and there. I don't run a website anymore because I'm slowing down a little bit, but I'm going to write a 5th book, and in that book I'm going to compare leftism, Saul Alinsky values with Islamic values and how they are exactly the same.
Oh, that is brilliant. So when can you get this book done, like tomorrow? No, how soon can you get this book done?
Well, I'm telling you, it's already half written, but
Oh.
and I wrote an article called Saul Alinsky, Islam and Radical Law Rules. Radical, you know, his book is called Rules for Radicals.
Yes.
And I wrote the articles, Alinsky, Islam, and Radical Rules. The same thing. The rules are the same. Their values are the same. So I wrote wholly different, showing how different biblical values are from Islamic values. And this coming book is going to be about how leftist values, Alinsky values, are the same, almost identical, mirror copy of Islamic values.
That is a brilliant. I cannot wait to read that book. A brilliant idea for just a brilliant pulling together what your life experience has taught you, what your study has taught you. So, Nonie Darwish, I cannot thank you enough for joining me. Thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure, Debbie. You're the best. I appreciate it.
Appreciate you, and we will talk to you again. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I really that woman is a fount of brilliant insight from what basically because the life she's lived, what she's studied and learned. Love her books. That sounds like a great new book she has.